What is up, Ravens flock? Huge shout out for your support for the 410 Sports Talk. James and Glenn are the best in the business. They're killing it right now. They love talking Raven talk. Make sure you go subscribe to their channel. Let's go Ravens. Big trust.
Welcome in, everyone, to another episode of 410 Sports Talk. I'm Glenn Martin here with my co-host James Haskell and a new guest and friend of the show, Kevin Oestreicher, the managing editor over at the Ravens Wire, part of USA Today. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys. This is an exciting football team, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Glenn and I have talked about this. While not the prettiest team, this so far might be my favorite Ravens team based on their display of grit and just get it done, positive attitude type, along with all the narratives that Lamar Jackson has been knocking down 1 week at a time.
Oh, no, I like that 2019 team, though, Jimbo. That 2019 team was fun, boy.
True, but it ended in heartbreak. So
yes, it did. Yes.
So, Kevin, our first question is this: the trade deadline just passed, and of course, the Ravens did not make any moves. A lot of people, of course, are looking to the return of our guys off of injury as our acquisitions, if you will, post the trade deadline. But were you surprised that the Ravens didn't make any moves up against the trade deadline?
I wasn't overly shocked by it. I feel like, especially when John Harbaugh is saying he wasn't really anticipating anything going on, that was kind of, and some of it can be coach speak, and all of a sudden he says that and they go out and they trade for somebody massive. But yeah, I view it as it was the acquisitions that are coming back. I mean, you look at Nick Boyle and Derek Wolfe and Chris Westry and whoever you want to put in there. It would have been nice, I think, to see a guy come in, maybe a smaller type move. I don't think the Von Miller type move was in the cards for them this year, such as giving up a second and third round pick, regardless of how much salary Denver or another team would have eaten there. I just think, the roster has a lot of holes, and that's part due to injury and just all the guys they have lost. So would one guy have fixed everything? Probably not. But I was looking at potentially running back or maybe a cornerback like Kyle Fuller if Denver eats the salary, maybe an offensive lineman. But to bring in another guy, a new guy, and they've been doing it all year. For example, at the running back position, they already have had to coach up 3 new guys. The mesh point is a big key for them. Do they want to go through that process of teaching a running back how to do all that, especially if he's not familiar with a mesh point offense? It can be difficult. So I wasn't overly shocked by it. I think Baltimore has a lot of confidence in their guys. And, I do too. I don't think not making a trade is like the death wish for this team where they're not going to be competitive, because I think they will be.
Yeah, I think the only spot I was a little surprised that they didn't address is some depth on the offensive line. I mean, I look at their tackle position with McCarry being out. Yeah, Tyree Phillips is an option, but are you really thrilled about having him out there for the next however many games McCarry's out? And then Villanueva, yeah, he's played, but he's been banged up, missed a lot of practice. I would have liked to see some sort of tackle depth here, but I mean, so what are your thoughts on the fact that they haven't really done a lot on the offensive line as far as depth at that position?
Yeah, I do agree it's very thin, and it doesn't help that Stanley and McCarry and all those guys are out. The thing with trading for offensive linemen, though, I agree. Maybe there were guys like Morgan Moses from the Jets, potentially Andre Dillard from the Eagles, could have been acquisitions if the team's looking to move off of them for pretty low-cost draft picks. Now, Baltimore has 10 draft picks in the upcoming draft, 9 of them in the first 4 rounds projected. So they had some stuff to work with. They could have moved some picks around and added some depth pieces. But I honestly think their acquisition was Cedric Ogbuehi, and people might not be too thrilled with that fact because he hasn't really been great over the course of his NFL career. But trading for offensive linemen, usually the price is a bit higher, and it takes a lot in order to acquire a really quality one, especially mid-season when teams are already looking for guys. They don't want to get rid of a guy unless it's like a very extreme situation. So I was maybe a little surprised they didn't look into it a little bit more, but I do think that Ogbuehi was that guy for them, and they could. Maybe we'll see a rotation like last year with Phillips and Ogbuehi before McCarry gets back. Hopefully McCarry is able to recover, but at the same time, it would have been nice to see maybe a Morgan Moses or Andre Dillard.
Yeah, certainly offensive linemen don't grow on palm trees.
Oh, wow. That was horrible. I mean, again, another poor attempt at humor.
So you mentioned some of these guys, Derek Wolfe, Nick Boyle, Chris Westry, all activated from IR and returned to practice over the bye week. Which of these, of the players I named, and you could even add in there, I feel like I'm missing someone, but of those players, which of those do you anticipate having the biggest impact coming out of the bye?
I think it has to be Nick Boyle. I just think, The Ravens' run offense has struggled. You can look at the box score stats and you can see, they're third in yards and they're, fourth in yards per attempt. But if you really watch the team, you can tell that it's just not there right now. They've had some strong weeks, but that was, I think, just earlier in the year. Las Vegas, they ran it pretty well. Kansas City, same thing. But we've seen teams key in on that run game and just take it out completely. And it's kind of given me a greater appreciation for the running backs, like J.K. Dobbins, like Gus Edwards, and other running backs in that position. It's kind of like, when they become 30, you can replace them and everything's fine in their replaceable position, but they're missing Edwards and Dobbins. So with Boyle coming back, he's like an extra offensive lineman out there. He can really help get the push in the run game that they need, especially with them struggling on the offensive line right now to really find some pieces that can be stable. They've gone through a ton of shuffling there. So I think with him coming back, and even if they want to call up Eric Tomlinson for a couple weeks, run 4 tight end sets if they really want to, they could. But I think Boyle and what he can do to this offense is just so massive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's like an offensive tackle with the feet of a fullback. I mean, it's just it makes no sense how a guy that big can move the way he does and bring the agility to that position. It's no doubt impressive. I want to ask about Chris Westry. I think he's kind of an under radar guy. Not a lot of fans are even talking about his return to the practice field, but they are talking about the lack of depth and I think unfairly criticizing a guy like Anthony Averett, who had one really poor game against the Colts. But outside of that, I think he's played quite well considering, the him having to be thrust into this more prominent role after the injury to Marcus Peters. But with Chris Westry coming back, what kind of flexibility, what kind of improvements might we see from the secondary?
Yeah, well, it gives you a lot of flexibility for sure. I think a player with his height and his speed is definitely an asset to this team. And I agree with Averett. This is like a what have you done for me now lately league. And I think that Colts game is still kind of fresh in people's minds a little bit, even though it did happen a couple weeks ago. And he responded well, I think, against Los Angeles, then against the Bengals, where he was targeted like every single play in the first quarter and responded really well to that. With Westry, though, it gives you depth, and this team needs it. I mean, they need it pretty badly in the secondary. They're missing Marcus Peters, and Chris Westry's not Marcus Peters. But what he can give you is, I think, really solid play. He played about 38, I think, percent of defensive snaps in week 1 against the Raiders before going down. So he was a part of that game plan. Now, this was before Jimmy Smith came back, so his snaps might be a bit less than that when he actually first comes back. But they've been kind of rotating in guys. They do have Marlon Humphrey, obviously, who, is Marlon Humphrey, and then Averett and Smith as well. So I think Westry gives them a very talented player who can continue to work up and give them, I think, defensive snaps, I think, in a bigger role down the stretch here.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. Certainly, like Glenn said, I think a lot of people are underestimating the value that he brings to the team in coming back. But I want to stay on the defensive side of the ball and talk about something here because a lot of folks this is always interesting. Anytime you're coming off a loss, and especially with a bye, everyone talks about all these wholesale changes and things that need to happen, and they're not always realistic. But one of the things I think Glenn and I have both tried to do is talk about things that can change or that they can improve upon now. Tackling has been a serious issue. Do you see that as something that can be, midway through the season, something that can be corrected now, they can right the ship? Or do you think this will be a theme we'll see all throughout the rest of the season?
I think they can improve it, but I think it's not going to be like a 1-week fix where all of a sudden they come out against Minnesota and they miss no tackles. They're going to have to work up to it, which they just have not done this year so far. They're one of the worst tackling teams in the NFL. I would love, to kind of stop talking about that and in a couple weeks say, hey, look, they tackle, like they're good at tackling again. But John Harbaugh's talked about it. He puts it down to a fundamental thing and say, look, we need to teach those fundamentals. They've been working on tackling. They emphasize tackling, but we just haven't seen those results yet. So it's something where if they come out against Minnesota and just can't tackle again, it suddenly becomes, okay, now it's time to hit the panic button because they've had the bye, they've had the time to reflect. And I think the loss puts things in perspective for them because, the mindset between a win and a loss, regardless of how close it is, we've seen the Ravens with the epic comeback against Indianapolis and the 66-yard field goal in the 4th and 19 against Detroit. If they had lost those games, I think their mindsets would have been a bit different in terms of, right, what can we do now? Now, that's not saying they ignore their problems after a win, but I think that loss really puts things in perspective for them. And the tackling is at the forefront of that for me. It's guys like Patrick Queen and Deshaun Elliott. And, the Bengals game, things just kind of spiraled, I think. It just spiraled out of control to the point where just nothing was happening positively on that defense at the end of the game. And, we saw a very good first half from them, all things considered, but then the second half was atrocious. So I think the tackling can be improved, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was more of a multi-week thing where it builds up instead of all of a sudden they can tackle again flawlessly against Minnesota.
Hey, and we'll take any progress, right, Glenn?
Absolutely. It's really a head scratcher because a lot of the culprits of the tackling issue this year were here last year, and we didn't have this same issue. It's kind of a head scratching thing here when you consider that a lot of they're familiar faces, and yet last year they could tackle, and this year they can't. So a lot of the blame is being put on Rob Ryan. And I mean, look, the guy he's their position coach and for the linebackers, that is, but he's not the one, pulling guys down on the field. So it's kind of a who is to blame? Why has this become such a big issue here? And I'm hopeful that they can get it fixed midseason because I don't want this to be, the same problem we're seeing weeks 15 through 17. But hopefully that's not the case. But offensively, the struggles, you mentioned it earlier, it's been the run game. I mean, who would have thought that? Yeah, I mean, you're right. The stats are so deceiving because if you watch the last 3 weeks of this team, this team does not have a good run game. And if it wasn't for Lamar Jackson, I mean, it would be really, really bad here. I mean, he seems like the only explosive, talent in the backfield right now, and that's a problem. So, do you think that that's something that can get fixed? Is it just they don't have the guys? These running backs are old, they're washed up, and they just don't have much left. Is it the offensive lines just not opening holes? Is this run game something they can fix, Kevin?
I think they can fix it. It does start up front, though, with the offensive line. Regardless of who your running back is, whether it is J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, or Le'Veon Bell, if there's a defensive player in the backfield in less than a second or less than 2 seconds, there's not a lot that a running back can do with that. It's the same thing in pass protection. If there's a defender in the offensive backfield and right in the quarterback's face right after he gets the snap, Lamar Jackson can do some stuff with that, but not a lot of quarterbacks can. So I think it's on the offensive line a little bit. And look, this is a team that has gone through countless offensive line combinations throughout this season due to injury. And it's been brutal. So they're trying their best, but at the same time, it just hasn't come together for them. I think Kevin Zeitler has played well. He's been really the only consistent player who's been out there. Bradley Bozeman also, but he had that back injury a couple weeks ago, but he hasn't really missed a game. So they're looking at just a bunch of different guys who are trying to learn to play alongside each other. But then looking at the running backs, you're right. The stats are deceiving. And it's almost a point to where, like, if they don't get it together in the next couple of weeks, like, is it Nate McCrary time? Do they call Nate McCrary from the practice squad to figure stuff out? Do they go back to the free agent market? They didn't acquire a running back, so I don't know if that's the best option for him. But, I mean, I think overall, these running backs, obviously, it's not like 2016 anymore, right? This is not the Le'Veon Bell from 2016 or the Devonta Freeman from 2016. That's not a shot at them. It's just, what it is right now. So I think as they learn this offense and continue to kind of grow in it, because, we're not to the point where that can be an excuse anymore. You kind of look at that as a first month thing. Like, oh, they're still learning the offense. But with Dobbins and Edwards, they didn't lose to those guys like a month before the regular season or a month and a half before the regular season. They lost them like 10 days a week before the regular season.
Felt like 10 hours.
Guys, right. Yeah, literally had to sign guys off the street, teach them the entire offense pretty much, get them as far up speed as they could. And they had to get him in there to play against Las Vegas. So I think they're still, trying to figure out how to be in this offense. As they're using Latavius Murray, it seems like, in a Gus Edwards role. Devonta Freeman more like a Justice Hill. So they're trying to incorporate those guys, but they're not Edwards and they're not Dobbins. So I think we're not going to see that full level offense because you just don't have that talent at running back. But at the same time, I do think it could be much, much better. And I think it all starts with Lamar Jackson and the offensive line. And obviously then the running backs have to contribute as well.
Yeah, man, I agree with all your points 100%. And we're going to get, of course, to the Vikings game here with Kevin from the Ravens Wire on our show. But before we do, I got to talk about the AFC as a whole. And this, I think, is really intriguing from an entertainment perspective. The AFC is very entertaining because there's no true front runners, no guys, there's no teams out in front. People will like to say the Bills, but look, you are what the scoreboard says you are. They're 5-2. Or wait, I think they're 6-2 at this point, right?
No, you're right.
Yeah, they're 5-2, just like the rest of us,
Yep.
right? Like, so really, it's up in the air. And to be honest, if you're looking at the playoff picture, you're not even talking about Kansas City right now. But it's starting to look, in your mind, is it starting to look like the Ravens have as good of a shot as anyone at that number one seed in the AFC, and then also potentially representing the AFC, coming out of the playoffs?
Yeah, I think this is a year where really there's no clear favorite right now. People do look to the Bills, and I think that's where, if you would ask, all right, who's going to win the AFC, most people right now would probably say Buffalo. But at the same time, I think all these teams in the AFC have their weaknesses, whether that be because of injuries, because of poor play. Like Kansas City can't play defense right now. Baltimore's been going through injuries. Cleveland's had their injuries. There are all these different teams. Los Angeles, the Chargers were looking great, and then all of a sudden they've kind of fallen off a cliff. So it's an every week league. And I think once the playoffs start, as the Ravens have learned, it is literally a whole new season. And that's where I think the Ravens can continue to grow. Now, for me, before the year, I had said an AFC championship game or bust was it for me, because it just shows that continued growth. Lamar Jackson's rookie year, it's the playoffs, they lose in the wild card round. Second year, they get the bye, lose in the divisional round. Then in his third year, they get the playoff win, but lose in the divisional round. So it shows that continued growth. But, how far can a team go with such injuries that decimate them? I don't know. But this team has shown that they can do it. They can compete with the best of the best. And I think the AFC being so wide open, and, if you want to water that down, but even the AFC North and just how wide open that is right now, I think that's Baltimore's division to lose. And obviously the teams in it are talented, like Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, obviously. But I think the AFC Baltimore definitely has a shot to come out of it. It's just a matter of they continue to build. And I think tackling also, you got to go back to the tackling. If they can tackle, it'll go a long way.
Yeah, no doubt. I don't think I can remember a year where you're at, week 8 in the league and you can make a genuine argument for 8 teams to get the number 1 overall seed. You could genuinely make an argument for 8, maybe even 9 teams to make the number 1 overall seed and get that elusive bye week. Not sure if the Ravens would even want that. The last time they got that, it didn't end so well. So who knows if you gave some truth serum to John, what he would even say if he wants that number 1 seed or if he wants to, just keep things rolling. And so my next question is about the Vikings. They're taking on a Vikings team. We know this team is usually really, really good coming out of a bye week. The Minnesota Vikings just lost to a Cowboys team with a backup quarterback. And normally you'd say, wow, how does the team lose to a backup quarter? Well, they got a pretty darn good team in Dallas this year, and that could be why. But does this team scare you at all when the Vikings are coming to town? Does Captain Kirk give you any fear? Does this offense loaded with position talent? Does it make you nervous about, the Ravens coming out of the bye and taking on this Vikings team?
It does a little bit, but not to the point where I think Baltimore's going to come out and put up like a stinker game. I think they're motivated after they lost to Cincinnati. And you mentioned, the Vikings have a lot of skill position talent. Justin Jefferson, second year out of LSU now, Jamar Chase coming out of LSU, those two were teammates. Mm-hmm. So, if Marlon Humphrey's the guy who's matched up on Justin Jefferson, does he have that bounce back game? But like we've been talking about all show, for example, if you go back to the Jamar Chase, 82-yard touchdown, that's a 6-yard gain if he's tackled. It literally is the yards after the catch that killed this team in that game. Justin Jefferson can do all that to a defense. Dalvin Cook is somebody who is not a big player in terms of his height, but he's like a bowling ball type player, very physical player, and also has some deceptive speed and elusiveness to him as well. So you have to get him on the ground. Kirk Cousins, yes, not the best quarterback in the NFL, but he can certainly get the job done. But, we saw this Ravens team, their exotic blitzes, how Don Martindale kind of cooks up that scheme against Minnesota. Kirk Cousins is a veteran quarterback. We saw a second-year guy in Joe Burrow dice up this defense in the second half. But I think Cousins is a little bit more susceptible to mistakes and kind of maybe getting confused. He's a smart football player, but they're going to have to shut down Jefferson, shut down Thielen on the offensive side of the ball, obviously, and make sure that if they can make the Vikings one-dimensional, maybe take the run game out of the equation, they get a big early, maybe 14-3 or 17-6 or something like that. They take the run game out, kind of put pressure on Minnesota to throw the football a bit more. They can focus on that, and I think that would be a good way to get in front and kind of hold the lead.
Yeah, I tell you what, Kirk Cousins might not be the best quarterback in the NFL, but he might be the best at getting paid. Man, that guy knows how to get paid. He secures the bag over and over and over again. It just shocks me every single time I see that little ticker on the bottom of the screen.
That's another guy. Jimmy has hate for some Kirk Cousins. He has some hate for a few guys out there, and Kirk is one of them. But look, they got 4 losses, Jimbo, by a total of 15 points in 4 losses. So this is a team, they lose, but they don't lose by a wide margin. That's for sure.
Yeah, and certainly, based on I'd be willing to bet based on their internal projections for what their goals were, and even the local news, they were expecting them to be a little bit better than what they're showing this year. So the talent, and based on the talent, like you're saying, there's talent there. So my question to you is, Kevin, is what is it that on the other side of the ball, what is it the Ravens got to do? You kind of talked about it, but what is it that you see the Ravens have to do offensively to, put this one away early?
Yeah, definitely the fast start and putting it away early is important. I think staying balanced. We've seen how much of a leap this pass offense has taken this season, headlined by the leap of Lamar Jackson and his ability to throw the football. He just looks more confident. He's cool. He's calm in that pocket and really doesn't panic as much as I think we've seen. Sometimes he can hold the ball for a little too long and run into sacks. The deep ball accuracy isn't completely there yet. But look, nobody's a perfect player, and I think I'm very impressed with Jackson. But the balance, play calling comes back to Greg Roman. And if he can continue to, he's impressed me overall. There have been a couple of quarters, a couple of halves where it has kind of gone back to what we saw in 2020 with all right, the Ravens are running for 6 yards a carry. Let's throw the ball 3 straight times. But at the same time, I think Roman has grown. I think the additions of Keith Williams and T. Martin have helped with that. I think the offense has shown that it can spread its wings out a little bit. So if they can show that the pass game is working, the Vikings will have to, if they do decide to key in on the run, kind of step back from that box a little bit. Hopefully the run game can take advantage of that. But yeah, the Vikings on defense, they just lost to Neil Hunter, their leading sack guy for the season, I believe it was. So they're now working with Everson Griffin. Former Raven Michael Pierce is coming back to town. He has 2 sacks this year. So they'll have to figure out how to stop that Vikings pass rush. Now, hopefully they can do it with their new offensive lineman in there. Maybe it's Phillips, maybe it's Boyle or whatnot in Villanueva, of course. But yeah, I think a fast start's the really big key here for Baltimore.
Yeah, that's a big law. I think Danielle Hunter is one of the most underrated players over the last few years. Of course, he's had some injuries the last few, but before that, certainly one of the best premier pass rushers. But Kevin, I got to ask you, what's your prediction? What ultimately happens this Sunday?
Yeah, I think this is a Baltimore win. You mentioned the Ravens coming off of a bye. John Harbaugh, 10-3 since taking over Baltimore there in 2008, coming off of his bye immediately after. I think the Ravens, again, they'll be motivated. I think they've been thinking about this loss for a long time. You get to sit with it a little bit and say, you look at that film, you review it. And I think this team is motivated to go out there and kind of show the league again that, hey, we're here. I think every week we've kind of seen a new team be crowned like the face of the AFC. It's Baltimore, it's Tennessee, it's Buffalo, it's Cincinnati, whoever you want to say it is. I think that the Ravens right now, they're being kind of undervalued a bit by a lot of people. And if it comes down to a close game still, I think it'll be about a 10-point, 13-point win for Baltimore. But if it does come down to a close game, which, look, I could see happening, Minnesota's talented, I think it comes down to the Lamar Jackson effect and also the Justin Tucker effect.
Nice. Well, I like it. I'm looking forward to that. I haven't picked the Ravens to lose in a long time. Glad that Kevin's on my side. Kevin, why don't you let the folks know where they can find the stuff you're working on, where they can find you on social media, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the host and producer of the podcast Locked On Ravens. We go 5 days a week there, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time when we put out that content. It's on anywhere you get your podcasts, so Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or in video form on YouTube. Also, I am the managing editor at Ravens Wire, so I write about this team 7 days a week, so a lot of Ravens-oriented content coming out from me. Also, you can find me on Twitter at ChaosStriker34.
Awesome. Thanks again, man. We appreciate the time. Have a great one.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. It was a blast.